Good afternoon, Vande Mataram, Jai Hind. Today we are going to learn the emergency provisions from the Article 350 to Article 360. So without wasting time, let's start. The emergency provisions in India. The emergency provisions are written in Part 18 of the Constitution from Article 352 to Article 360. These are given to manage outstanding conditions like war, rebellion, internal disturbance. The reasons behind the incorporation of these provisions in the Constitution is to safeguard the integrity, sovereignty and security of the country, etc. The emergency provisions are influenced by the German Constitution. We have taken the emergency provisions in the Constitution of India from the Germany. Then there are three types of emergency. The national emergency given in the Article 352, the state emergency given in the Article 356 and Article 365, and the financial emergency in Article 360. So we'll discuss them one by one. First one is the national emergency. It can be declared by the president due to the war or external aggression, the external emergency or armed rebellion or internal emergency. National emergency can be applied to the entire country or part of country. The president announced it a national emergency even before the actual occurrence of the war or external aggression. The president can declare this only on the written recommendation from the entire cabinet. The entire cabinet has to give the written consideration or the recommendation for the national emergency to the president before the president announces it. The proclamation by the president can be subjected to judicial review. The parliamentary approval. The proclamation must be approved by both the houses of the parliament within the 1 month by the special majority. Before it was 2 months, but later the Constitution Amendment Act that was removed to the 1 month. The president has to take them. The 44th Amendment Act reduced the duration from 2 months to 1 month. This extent of life of national emergency by 6 months at a time can be done for multiple time for the infinite period. In case of dissolution of Lok Sabha, the approval of proclamation or extension of its life can be done by Rajya Sabha only. The proclamation survives till 13 days after the first sitting of the newly reconstruction of Lok Sabha. The proclamation can be revoked by the president anytime. This doesn't need parliamentary ratification. Also, it can be revoked by the Lok Sabha with a simple majority. This means Rajya Sabha has no role of revocation. So parliamentary approval means the parliament approves the proclamation, or we can say the national emergency has to enact or not. It has to be approved by both the houses within the 1 month by the 44th Amendment Act 1978. This goes for the 6 months. After the 6 months, again the reapproval required. If Lok Sabha is not in session or dissolved, the Rajya Sabha approval is only required or sufficient. But the new Lok Sabha elected, then after 30 days of the sitting of newly elected Lok Sabha, it has to be approved. Then the effects of national emergency. The center can issue the executive directions to states on any matter. The state government are not suspended during this time. The parliament has the power to make law on matter in the state list. There are three types of list: the union list, state list and the concurrent list. The union list is under the union government, state list is under the state government and the concurrent list is under the both union and the state government. But in the national emergency, the parliament has the right to make any laws for the state list. If parliament is not in session, president can pass ordinance on the subject of state list. Parliament can also give powers and duties to the center to carry out tasks under its extended jurisdiction. These legislative actions become ineffective within 6 months of the emergency stops to operate. There was some effects of the national emergency, and remaining are These laws apply even to states where the emergency isn't imposed. The president has the power to modify the distribution of revenues between the center and states until the end of financial year when the emergency is over. Such orders have to be laid before Parliament. Parliament by law has the power to extend the term of Lok Sabha and State Legislative Assembly by 1 year at a time, any number of times. This becomes ineffective by the end of 6 months of emergency end. So, if any part, or we can say the entire country, is having a national emergency, at that time Lok Sabha and the State Legislative Assembly, that period of 5 years is extended, but after the emergency is revoked, then it becomes ineffective at the end of 6 months. The impact of the fundamental rights. Under Article 358, all fundamental rights mentioned under the Article 19, that is right to freedom, are automatically suspended. When a proclamation of national emergency on external ground, not armed rebellion, is declared, this action applies to the whole country, not a part of country. That means under Article 19, the right to freedom is suspended under the emergencies. Any law can be passed that infringes these rights, but not only other laws. Any action as per the laws also remains for judicial remedy even after the end of the emergency. Under the Article 359, the presidential order can be passed disallowing people from seeking a judicial remedy to enforce other fundamental rights. That is Article 40 to 32 that are specified in that order, except Article 20 and 21. The right to life and liberty for a specific period only. The right remain in force, but the right to seek remedy is suspended. The state can make laws abridging the fundamental rights mentioned in the order, and such laws cannot be challenged in court. Any executive actions under such laws is also protected. The presidential order has to be approved by both the houses. Under the Article 359 is available even during the national emergency on armed rebellion, including war or external aggression. The presidential order can apply to the whole country or a part of the country. Then the president rule on, you can say, the state emergency. When constitutional machinery breaks down in a state, the president's rule is imposed by the state. Governor asks the president to impose the presidential rule on a state. This can be proclaimed if the president is satisfied to the governance of a state can be carried out in accordance with the constitution. That means according to the constitution, the state has to perform, and according to the president it is not performing, then the president, with the help of, or with the governor's help, the president rule is applied on a state. In this case, the president can act with or without governor's report. Also, when a state doesn't follow any direction from the center, president rules can be imposed. Then the parliament has to approve the proclamation within 2 months in both the houses by a simple majority. The rule can be extended by 6 months at the time of maximum period of 3 years. But in the national emergency, it is for the infinite period. You can impose the national emergency, but for the state emergency, it is only up to for the 3 years. If Lok Sabha is resolved, Rajya Sabha can approve it, but the Lok Sabha has to approve 2 within 30 days after the first sitting. But beyond the first year, the president rules can be extended 6 months at a time only if the national emergency proclaimed in the country or part of the state. Election Commission certifies the election cannot be done in a particular state. The president's proclamation can be revoked by president anytime. This doesn't need parliamentary approval. The parliament on its own can't revoke the presidential rule in a state. It also affects fundamental right or power of the High Court. All legislative and executive power of state assumed by the president, and the state executive is diminished and the legislative dissolved by or suspended. The governor acts as a president's agent and work with the help of chief secretary and advisor appointed by the center. That means the state legislative assembly is no longer there, so the governor is act as an agent in the state and other chief secretary or advisors are there. The parliament can assume legislative powers with itself or delegate to the president or other authority. It can make laws on state lease matter for the state only. The president can issue ordinance on the state lease matter or make expenditure from the state budget if parliament not in session. The presidential proclamation imposing president's rule is subject to judicial review. You can go to court for the presidential emergency. Then the difference between the national emergency and the presidential emergency. National emergency in the article 352 and the presidential rule is in the article 356. There are two articles under the presidential rule. The article 350 says the president to issue a proclamation if he is satisfied that situation has arisen that the state can't be carried out in accordance with the provisions of the constitution. And the article 365 says the state fails to comply with or to give effect to any directions from the center. So there was the two major articles in the presidential rule. So now we will see the differences between the two emergencies. It can be proclaimed only when the security of the India or part of it is threatened by war, external aggression or the armed rebellion. And I already said that the two articles in the presidential rule. Then the second difference is during its operation the state executive or the legislative continue to function and exercise the power assigned to them under the constitution. Its effect is that the center gets concurrent power of administration and legislation in the state. But in the presidential rule, during its operation the state executive is diminished and the state legislative is either suspended or dissolved. The president administrator the state through the governor and the parliament makes the law on the state. In brief, the executive and the legislative powers of the state are assumed by the center. The third difference is under this the parliament can make laws on the subject enumerated in the state list only by itself. That is, it cannot delegate the same to any other body or authority. Under this, the parliament can delegate the power to make laws for the state to the president or to any other authority specified by him. So far, the practices has been for the president to make the laws for the state in constitution with the members of the parliament from the state. Such laws are known as the President's Act. Then the fourth difference is there is no minimum period prescribed for its duration, but for the presidential rule the duration is 3 years. Under the national emergency, the relationship of the center with all other states undergo modification, but in the presidential rule the relationship of only a state under the emergency with the center undergo modification. As we all know that the national emergency is for the entire nation and the center emergency or the presidential emergency, presidential rule is for one or two states. Every resolution of parliament approving its proclamation or its continuance must be passed by the special majority. Every resolution of parliament approving its proclamation or its continuance can be passed only by simple majority. That means for the national emergency it has to be passed by the special majority, and for the state or we can say the presidential rule it has to be passed by simple majority. So the basic difference in the special majority and the simple majority is that in simple majority the present and voting members are considered, and in the special majority 2/3 present and voting are considered. The seventh difference is it affects the fundamental rights of the citizen. It doesn't affect the fundamental rights of the citizen. Lok Sabha can pass a resolution for its revocation, but there is no such a provision. It can be revoked by the president only on its own. Then comes the financial emergency. The third sort of emergency is financial emergency provided under the Article 360. It says that if the president is satisfied that the financial stability or credit of India or any of its part is in danger, he may declare a state of finance. And the remaining are some differences that we have seen. Then comes the financial emergency. The third sort of financial emergency is financial emergency under the Article 360. It states that if the president is satisfied that the financial stability or credit of India or any of its part is in danger, he may declare the state of financial emergency. Under such circumstances, the executive and the legislative power will go to the center. Similar to the other two types of the emergencies, it has added to be approved by the parliament. It must be approved by both the houses of the parliament within 2 months. This type of emergency can be operated as long as the situation exists and may be revoked by the subsequent proclamation. This article has never been invoked. That means the financial emergency has never been in action in India so far. A proclamation issued under the Article 360 can be revoked, varied by the subsequent proclamation, as we discussed this point earlier as well. Then the effects of the financial emergency. The union government may give guidance to the state relating the financial matters. The president may ask state to cut down the salaries, allowances of any class of the government employees. The president may ask the state to reserve all the money bills for the parliament's consideration after they have been passed by the legislature of the state. The president may also give direction to reduce the salaries and allowances of the central government employees, including the judges of the Supreme Court and the High Court. In financial emergency, we need to have some type of money in reserve. So the salaries and allowances are cut down and it has been saved. Then the emergencies in India so far. In 1975 to 1977, PM Miss Indira Gandhi, in the morning 26 June 1975, the All India Radio addressed the country. The president has proclaimed emergency. There is nothing to panic about. This led to a national emergency in 1975, which is marked as the darkest hour of Indian democracy. This made the starting of the 21-month long run of democracy into the darkest tunnel. It was for the first time that the emergency was imposed on the ground of internal disturbance in the country. Reasons given by the government for the proclamation of the emergency in 1975 was a danger to security of the country and the parliamentary democracy owing to the movement of Jai Prakash Narayan. The PM opined that the proclamation has been necessary to give pace to the economic development and uplifting of the underprivileged. The government informed that the security agencies were warning against the intervention of powers from the abroad which could destabilize and weaken India. The reasons for the actual proclamation. The months before the emergency, the entire country was facing crises at all spheres, whether social, economic or political. The economy of India was at a very dismal condition, which unemployment at its peak, inflation was galloping and the food was scarcely available. The monsoon, the life of India was dismal. There were droughts in 1972 to 73. Power generation had dropped as there is no water, therefore the power generation has dropped. Prices of crude oil increased 4 times, putting pressure on the import bill for both fuel and fertilizers. Although there was minimal or no trouble across the border during this year. The country had just came out of the 1971 war. Although there was a huge refugee crisis. Lakhs and lakhs of people from Bangladesh had arrived and were a burden on the already limited resources of the country. Even after 3 to 4 years, the expectation of those had been challenged for the country. There were protest riots and various parts of the country which started from Gujarat because of the fee hike in LD College of Engineering and reached Bihar and to the heartland. The movement was called the Navi Nirman Andolan in Gujarat, asking for dismissal of state government which was highly corrupted. Coming in of Jai Prakash Narayan in the ground added fuel to the fire. He was staunch Gandhian, a hero of the freedom struggle and a selfless activities. And hence he got support from all the parts. All of the opposition supported him. He got so popular that movement was henceforth called as JP movement. JP called for the total revolution in the streets of Patna. He asked the government to resign. Students became backbone, boycotting classes, the rising protesting and the collective consciousness of the society. At the same time, the country was grappled with railway strikes by the socialist leader George Fernandez. The strike lasted 3 weeks and halted movement of goods and people. Historians like Guha notes that the participation extended millions of railwaymen. The Raj Narayan verdict of the Allahabad High Court was the last nail in the coffin. The Raj Narayan, a socialist leader, contested against the Smith Gandhi from rebellion in 1971 parliamentary election. He paid out in the court that her campaign involved government official and also breached the amount allowed as an expenditure. The Gandhi had to testify in the court and she became the first woman PM to do so. The court declared the election as null and void, but was given a span of 20 days to appeal to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court puts a conditional order on the High Court saying that she could attend Parliament but would not allow to vote till the verdict. The day after the judgment, the ordinance was passed, the proclamation emergency. In the latter, the President requesting declaration of the emergency. Gandhi wrote, "Information has reached us that indicate imminent danger to the security of India." The government during the emergency. There was a complete blackout for the next 2 days in Delhi and newspaper across sank in darkness. Every other leaders from opposition including Vajpayee, Advani, etc., hundreds of political leader activities and trade unionist journalists who opposed the government were arrested and jailed. All constitutional rights including fundamental rights were suspended, freedom of speech and press was withdrawn. The tragic incidents of Turkmen Gate occurred where police opened fire on the protesters who were protesting against the demolition of their houses. The National Family Planning Campaign was launched and the millions were forced to undergo sterilization through operation. Concept of committed bureaucracy and committed judicial took place. Several judges were sidelined to make the favorable as a Chief Justice of India. Several of non-Congress government were sacked and dismissed. Extra constitutional power were used highly. Finally, the most draconian impact was the passing of the 42nd Constitution Amendment Act. It is termed as the mini constitution. It had once altered several on the basis of the nature of constitution. It included several amendments like DPSP, fundamental right to DPSP, no questions on election of Prime Minister, amending the Article 368, etc. Several ordinances were passed, laws were subverted and the democracy was seen as a mockery. General elections were deferred twice and the session of the parliament was increased. After the emergency, the government on 21st March 1977 revoked the emergency and declared elections. Entire opposition rose against the incumbent under the Janata Party and fought the election. Congress was decimated and the popularity of Indira Gandhi was at the bottom. Morarji Desai became the Prime Minister of the first non-Congress government formed. However, the government remained at loggerheads internally and there was rarely any improvements in the governance. Much of the energy was used to prove charges against Gandhi rather than providing an alternative. The government appointed Shah Commission was appointed to look after the misdeeds of the government. The government, however, amended all the autocratic provisions made through the 42nd Amendment Act and implemented 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. The proclamation of the emergency was made straight and more difficult. The internal disturbance as a ground of proclamation was replaced as the armed rebellion. Several other amendments like passing the both houses approval from the cabinet and not the PM alone were put in the place. The Gandhi also prescribed a 20-point plan for economic revival. There was good economic progress, however, this can never justify the enormous disgrace for liberty and the political expression. Indian state during that time failed on the three fundamental tenets of a large democracy: rule of law, freedom and liberty, and federalism. So this was the happened the emergency is proclaimed by the Gandhi, and after that the Morarji Desai became the government. Morarji Desai's government has formed, but not much has changed at that time. So the commission was appointed for getting the beneficial of the country, but that was again not that much of important given for the country. So that was all about the emergency, the national emergency, the presidential emergency, and the financial emergency. We have already discussed these emergencies in the topic of president. Still, I have made a different video for better understanding. So that's it for today for the emergency. Have a good day and don't forget to like, subscribe and share. Thank you.